education in the classroom. We believe that character is an essential component of the educational process here at Belleville West. So what does it mean to be a person of character? Well, we are very privileged and honored to have here in the Performing Arts Center of Belleville West High School someone who epitomizes the essence of character. Now, in preparation for this assembly, you all know by this time the name Amy Biehl should be very, very well familiar to you all. She was a dynamic 26-year-old graduate of Stanford University. She was given a Fulbright scholarship to study in South Africa. You are also very familiar with the racist and brutal apartheid regime that governed South Africa for many decades. Amy Biehl was a highly regarded human rights activist who fought tirelessly to get the basic human rights that the South Africans deserved. Unfortunately, just days before she was to go back to the United States, she was murdered in an act of political violence. Now, in your culture, a culture that demands retaliation for the most trivial offenses, you all might expect swift, harsh punishment for an act like that. Amy's parents took a different approach. They believed this is what Amy would want. Amy's killers appeared before a commission and appealed and requested amnesty, a pardon. Amy's parents appeared in front of that commission and let it be perfectly clear that they did not oppose this. This, in turn, led to them giving amnesty, and they were released from prison. Now, to carry on Amy's passion and her vision, Amy's parents, Linda, and the late Peter Biehl, established the Amy Biehl Foundation. And today, Amy's mother, Linda, travels the world preaching restorative and emphasizing restorative justice. This is a different justice that we're used to, a justice that we're used to that says, let the punishment fit the crime. Linda emphasizes a different type of justice, a type of justice that promotes rebuilding, healing, reconciliation, and rebuilding relationships. Now, this is kind of hard for some of us to swallow, all right? This whole different thought process, the way we look at each other and our attitudes toward each other. But again, we are honored and privileged to have someone right here that does this on a daily basis. So please help me and give a mighty maroon welcome to Linda Biehl.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and a friend that you'll meet very soon to your school. We got a great tour this morning, and I spend a lot of times in schools in South Africa. And sometimes my heart palpitates a little bit because those schools do not have these amazing resources, the art rooms, the automotive shops, all of the things that could help so many kids in South Africa. But in a small way, our foundation is trying. But I just have one word for you guys. You know, appreciate your opportunities and appreciate what you have here, because millions of kids around the world don't have these things. Anyway, a lot of you have saw Inside the Struggle, the Amy Biehl story, maybe. Some of you see the film. Okay, but we're going to have a part of that and a little bit, a part of a couple of other pieces for about 7 minutes to kind of get you back into this. And then I will come back and introduce to you a very important person in my life. And we'll tell you more about the story, okay?
She left all this for this. An all-American honors student on a courageous journey to a land of revolution and unmarked graves.
I told her often enough that, Amy, you do things that I would never do. I wouldn't go in there.
She came to fight racism, but died for the color of her skin.
She was truly part of us, and she didn't deserve to die like she did.
It's a country where 16,000 gave their lives.
Amy was 16,001.
Tonight, her family's emotional journey to a world they never knew.
I now know what it feels like to be hated sheerly because of race.
To make a difficult decision.
You
kind of lose the anger and it just turns to sadness.
And discover a daughter they never imagined.
I was in awe of my daughter, how she affected people halfway around the world, and how they were celebrating her life.
The inspiring story of Amy Biehl.
Turning Point. Tonight, Inside the Struggle. The Amy Biehl story.
Good evening, I'm Diane Sawyer. Amy Biehl was like a lot of young women you may know, smart, vibrant, with a terrific sense of humor. But from the time she was in high school, she developed a passion that would eventually carry her halfway around the world to fight and die for freedom. 3 years ago, when we first broadcast this program, her parents were just beginning to cope with her tragic death, learning about a daughter they never knew, and the country that inspired her. Last month, they returned to South Africa to do something I'm not sure many parents in the same situation could do. I'll tell you about the amazing decision they made later. But first, Don Cladstrup has the inspiring story of Amy Biehl, a story that began just as South Africa was emerging from decades of oppression.
Good evening. The brutal murder of American exchange student Amy Biehl in Gugulethu near Cape Town last night has been condemned across the political spectrum.
Meanwhile, 2 party members have been arrested in connection with the murder of Ms. Biehl, who had a high profile among organizations struggling for an emerging democracy in South Africa.
She was only 26. She had gone to South Africa because she wanted to help.
Amy Elizabeth Biehl was born April 26, 1967. That's not very long ago, is it? She's survived by Linda and Peter, her parents, Kimberly, her sister, Molly, her sister, and Zachary, her brother.
Molly got the news first.
The State Department called me at my office, and having this woman say, well, something bad has happened, are you sitting down? And I said, is she dead? Yes, she's dead. What happened?
It happened along this road, in the Black Township of Gugulethu, when a mob of 30 youths attacked Amy as she was driving 3 friends home. The group began throwing stones, shattering her windshield. Amy jumped from her car, ran toward this gas station, but the mob caught her. They bludgeoned her with bricks, and then stabbed her to death. Her father, Peter, thinks about it every day.
There are many horrible ways to die, but that has to be among the most frightening. It kills me, tears me up that she had to go that way.
Murdered only 2 days before she was due to leave South Africa, where she had been working as a Fulbright scholar.
I was going to ask Amy to marry me today. I don't regret not having asked her before. The time was never right before. In the last letter that she wrote to me, she told me 1 year isn't so long in the big picture. How could we have known? How could I have known?
But Amy knew there was danger. She was acutely aware that behind the breathtaking beauty of this land is another picture, one not so pretty, one filled with pain and despair. This is the South Africa that moved Amy most, touched her, inspired her, before she was killed.
Amy's friends and colleagues also know that behind her beautiful face and inside her beautiful little body was the heart of a warrior.
As condemnation of the mob killing of Amy Biehl poured in this afternoon, at least 10 more people were killed in violent incidents around the country. KwaZulu police reported 2 people shot dead at Umlazi, while at eZakheni, the ANC reported 4 people killed when gunmen opened fire on residents.
Nearly 4 years after their daughter was stabbed and beaten to death in a South African township, the parents of Amy Biehl met the mother of one of her killers and told her they would not oppose his application to be freed from jail. Peter and Linda Biehl's arrival at the tiny concrete blockhouse in the black township of Guguletu was a moment packed with emotion.
Don't cry.
Yeah.
Don't cry.
Everyone marvels at it.
The logic would be that the South Africans should be giving some kind of reparation to the Beahls.
Instead of what's happening.
They've turned it all upside down. I mean, it's all sort of topsy-turvy. It is the victims, in the depth of their own agony and pain, who say the community which produced these murderers, we want to help that community be transfigured.
The Beahls have what South Africans call Ubuntu.
I say, Unobuntu. That person has the essence of humanity. Ubuntu speaks of generosity, of warmth, of hospitality, of compassion, of caring.
So, Ubuntu, what does it mean? Yes, it really means a person is a person through other persons, and we are all in this world together. Even some of us who live halfway around the world and have opportunities from people that live in places like South Africa and other parts of the world that oppression is rife. So today, I really just want to get to know you a little bit through maybe some questions. Do some of you have some questions, ideas you'd like to explore a little bit? Okay, because I think we're going to have a microphone set up in a little bit. So we'll do that in a little bit? Or do you have something burning that you want to know right now? Okay. So we will maybe not just talk. And I say we because I'd like to introduce someone very special in my life that maybe some of you don't understand how this relationship evolved. Didn't start off back then at that very day. It took a number of years. It took a lot of understanding, not just on my part, because we didn't talk about that last time in the last class. It also took a lot of courage and trust from another individual, and that's what it's about. Reconciliation's a big word in South Africa. It should be a big word in all of our lives, no matter who we are, as friends, family. We have to work with each other, and sometimes it is work to understand each other, where we're coming from. So just think about it as a little thing. Sometimes people don't understand that this is a big thing. This is a young man from Cape Town, South Africa, growing up in that township called Guguletu. And I love African words because they have great meanings. Guguletu means our pride. He grew up because he was proud of who he was. He was proud of his community. But their community did not have civil rights of any kind. The people living in that community had to just fight every day to live, to survive, for food. They went to work and they were beaten. They couldn't go from one city to another without passes. All of these things that hopefully some of you who have studied apartheid. Have you studied apartheid? And that means separation, keeping people apart. That's what it's all about. Well, hopefully we're an example today of bringing people together, and maybe an anecdote for some of this. So Tobacco, Penny, would you please join me up here? And I do talk about courage for him to be willing to come to this country. He's been here a number of times now to face questions, to actually try to explain what life was like for him as a young man and why his life went this road. Amy's life was that road, but all of a sudden, in one day, their roads came together. So Tobacco, first of all, we will ask you again to speak a little bit of your language. His first language is Xhosa, which is Xhosa. That's Mandela's language. Other languages in South Africa are Zulu, Sotho, Venda. There are 11 or 12 official languages in South Africa, including English and Afrikaans, which are more the language of the white people. But Xhosa is a great language. There are a lot of clicks. I don't say it well, but maybe you'd just like to hear a little bit.
Molweni nonke, I greet you all.
You know, I just want to say there are some pictures of Amy, my family, and a little bit about, the life we had. Actually, when you look at Newport Beach, we do not have a boat. We do not have a yacht. We don't even have a very fancy house compared to most people out there. We are just sort of an ordinary family. My daughter Kim, then there was Amy and Molly, and my son Zach, who was 16 at the time in the video, who was almost the same age, or around the same age, as the young men who were involved in Amy's death. Zach is now an O-line coach. Any of you guys play football? Any of you on the O-line? All right. I will tell him when I report to him about this school tonight. He lives in Newport Beach. I actually live with Zach and my daughter-in-law and his 15-month-old baby since my husband died of colon cancer about 5 years ago. So we had different lives, though. We weren't totally rich white Americans that most people perceive. And we tried really hard to give our kids opportunities in education. And our kids did well. They were good students. Amy was an A student, honor student, graduated #1 in her high school class, graduated as captain of the Stanford diving team that won the NC2A championships. She was very motivated. But as she grew and grew in her interests and her academics and her emphasis on international relations, sub-Saharan Africa, all this stuff, it led her to where I think her soul took her. She really got involved with the apartheid struggle back in the 80s. Tobacco was involved in the struggle back in the 80s, and I'm going to let him tell you about it.
Well, on the video you saw, I think, a 3-4-year-old baby girl that was watching a dead person. So that was the normal upbringing. Maybe you are wondering why parents did not take her away, not to watch that. There was no need for parents to do that because it could happen at any time and everyone was exposed to that. At elementary level, if you in the high school were busy having an uprising, when police come around, they start to shoot tear gas, which you saw as well. So it affects the elementary school. So when we grew up from elementary school, we knew exactly that whenever the high school had some uprising, the principal calls us and instructs us to go home before the police will come and shoot at the high school. So in that way, we were being saved. So that was a normal school life we had. You could not predict that in a week you'll have 5 normal school days. There was no way we'll have that, and we quite somehow enjoyed that, but we were still very young. We never went straight home as we instructed, because we always wanted to see, and sometimes we knew exactly when police come and start to shoot at the high school student, some people are going to die, some will be injured. So at that age, we knew exactly what's happening in the country. So by the time we were at high school, I was a student by day, led the student movement of the former liberation movement that I belonged to. So I was a student by day. In the evening, I was a militant, because that was the only time I could be, and some of us could be trained militarily. So we'll sneak out when our parents are fast asleep and go, as you say, you've got a soccer field here. Those are the premises that we use for military training, because there was no way you could just go and join the full ranks of the military. I think what the attitude that existed was that each and every state, they wanted to have all their recruitees, when they get to the actual full military camp, to be the best and be able to withstand the training. So the slogan was Paso by day, Appler by night, a student by day who goes and does all the normal duties. Even at times when one was arrested, people couldn't just not believe it. No, it cannot be him, not him, because he did everything in school. But what I was involved in during the evening, not even my parents were aware of that, not even some of the people that I served with, because we couldn't go as a collective. There were selections in terms of joining those. So that's how I grew up from school. My first year at high school, I had to fail grade 8, simply because I focused too much on politics. But the next following year, I was able to balance my academic life and politics as well, although it was tough. Even at high school, we did not have a normal education system. And at times, it will be tough. We'll have a number of uprisings, and it will affect our studies. Come end of the year exams, we will attempt and write, and you find we couldn't make the 40% pass mark, and then there will be an uprising. Then we will assess what is the highest rate achieved by the majority of students in that particular grades. And then we as students will be in war with our teachers and say 33% is the passing rate, and that's it. If they refuse, we burn down the school, we burn down the books. So eventually, because they knew we will do that, so they will surrender and say, okay, 33% is the passing rate. Teachers could understand what was happening as well, because they were part and parcel of what was going on. So at high school, around high school time, I had spent very little time at home. I would leave at 7 in the morning and come back around 7 in the afternoon. Spend 2 hours, go to sleep, not exactly to sleep, but act as if I'm back, I'm sleepy. I'm watching them to go to sleep, and then I sneak out of the house to go for my training. So that was my normal upbringing. At the age of 11 years old, having a friend and a close comrade being shot and killed in front of you was nothing out of normality. It was something normal. There was no reason for me to be shocked. My primary responsibility was to be motivated to achieve the reasons that the two of us were involved in, the objectives. So that's the kind of a life that we experience in the township.
You know, you all know who Nelson Mandela is. 89-year-old, amazing man who has had an amazing life. And I have had the opportunity to meet him, and it's an honor to meet him. He is getting awards like the Nobel Peace Prize. He is getting recognition around the world for being a great humanitarian, a great statesman. But in the same time frame that Tobacco was growing up, where the police were coming into his schools and shooting the student activists and tear gassing the communities, shooting innocent people, seeing all his friends getting shot and dead bodies around him, Mandela was in prison. But before he was in prison, there was a time when he was really known as a terrorist. And that is a word that we wrestle with a lot right now, because we hear that word all the time, don't we? Who is a terrorist? And people, and there are still people today who believe, you know, that Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. But most of the world look at him as a peacemaker. So sometimes, out of very difficult situations, those situations actually created great men. And Mandela was in prison as a terrorist, but soon became a leader of a nation, peacefully. And in some small way, I've never said this before, it's different, but it's similar. Many young people in South Africa were just like Nelson Mandela, trying to liberate their oppressed brothers. That's Tobacco and his background. But his political leadership at that particular time, when Mandela and his party came out more peacefully and started negotiating things, his party decided, you know what, this is not changing things for us. So they decided to become more militant. So his leadership at night would have them come and meet in fields and get them together and train them. Not like joining the U.S. Army and getting a paycheck and being shipped off to Iraq or something. but within their own communities. They were recruiting informally as probably a military action today, but they were getting trained to fight. And how could they fight? They could get access to guns, and they were taught how to make bombs, but they used stones and knives. And who was their enemy? Who was their enemy? White people. And Amy, in her quest to get involved in South Africa and being very active in many areas and academically and at the grassroots level, was asked to drive a few of her friends home one afternoon because they didn't have a ride. And I will tell you today, transportation is still a huge form of apartheid. We try and get our kids into good programs, and if we don't have transportation and can't get them home at night, it's just a really difficult thing. So those young women didn't have a ride home. And they said, Amy, you have a car. Will you give us a ride home? And so that's kind of the seed for our meeting here today. The process went on. We as a family were asked to come to South Africa and see for ourselves what Amy was involved in. It was a difficult thing to do. Most people said to our family, oh, how can you go to that country? But people from the very communities where Amy lost her life, and the people from the city of Cape Town said, this shouldn't have happened to her here. Would you come as a family and see what she was doing, what we're all about, that we're really human beings? Would you like to get on a plane and go to that country? Who would like to go and see? And why? Why would you go? Why? To understand, to try and comprehend, to actually see with our own eyes. Halfway around the world, we had never been to South Africa. Amy kept saying, when are you going to come? Come. Well, my son Zach was 16 in high school. How could I just leave? We were working. So we didn't go. Unfortunately, we didn't go when she could have taken us around. But had we not gone, and had we listened to others who said don't go, this whole opportunity of learning and going through a process of finding the truth and a forgiveness process and a reconciliation process would not have been possible. Sometimes you just have to take a step. And once you take that first step, you can take other steps. But it's not necessarily easy. So now today, after going through prison, yes, he was arrested with others, being freed from prison, given amnesty because of the truth and reconciliation process that we did speak. Desmond Tutu said, just come. We didn't know what to do exactly. We were the only Americans involved in this, and we felt this is a South African issue. South Africans had to really forgive themselves. It was important that South Africans start healing. We were an outsider. Amy chose to go there. We chose to go there, but we weren't really South African. So we asked Desmond Tutu, who again is a Nobel Prize winner, just like Mandela, and a man of courage and honor and morality, and we said, what would you do? We don't want to oppose this process if it's your process. And he said, well, just come and speak from your heart and tell them about Amy. And it was at that point in 1997, at that hearing, that Tobacco became a person to me, not just one of thousands of young people involved in their liberation movement. He was a person. You saw him, he and his three comrades, sitting there. And I think because we talked about Amy, and he saw us as parents, they have parents, that was one of the keys to unlock the next chapter or two. So here we are now together, and you can ask questions in just a second. But what are we doing now, and why are we together? And yes, we like each other, and we actually have fun together, and we laugh together, and we go out to eat together, and we have friends that we come stay with in St. Louis, like the Kendalls together. But why do you think we really are together? Because during the struggle, during his youth, everyone was trying to win their freedom. But what happens? South Africa got its freedom. Mandela was elected. It has a wonderful constitution that Amy was involved in research for. It's got that. but takes a lot of work. It needs another round of freedom fighters to help with all of the issues that apartheid, the legacy of apartheid, lack of education, lack of employment, lack of self-esteem, being always told that you were the worst in the, the scale of human, rights. And so now the work is building, reconciling, creating energy to help young people like you and younger in South Africa that actually have the freedom in a constitution, but the work to develop educational programs, freedom to do things, to do sports and drama, not having to be young militants. The World Cup's coming to South Africa in 2010, and that's providing a great deal of hope for young people. So soccer and all these things are really important. Things that you do every day that you take for granted, you don't always. How many of you play an instrument? Band. These kids in South Africa at 8 years old, you give them a saxophone, they are amazing. 3 months later, they're playing in front of Desmond Tutu. So we're working together to give the very same young people in the very same community that hasn't changed a whole lot that he grew up with new opportunities that he didn't have as a young man. So that's what the Amy Biehl Foundation is about. That's what I hope my daughter's legacy is about, and that's what I see for the future of South Africa. So how about some questions? Where's the mic?
We have about 10 minutes of questions, guys.
Okay.
Come on up here to the microphone and ask any question you like.
Talk more. I just know how, the movie, I guess.
Well, first I would like to say hello.
Hello.
And my question is, when you were asked to go to South Africa, did you have any hesitations?
I'm sorry?
So when you were asked to go to South Africa, did you have any hesitations?
Oh, do we have hesitations?
Yes.
I don't think we did. I think others around us tried to influence us not to, but we got together as a family, and we did talk about it. But we had one guiding light there, and that was Amy, and she'd always wanted to share South Africa. So that was definitely the strength of our ability to go there. It was a difficult time. It was like the Biehl family on parade. But we didn't see all the famous, beautiful spots of South Africa. We actually were taken into the very areas where Tobacco and others lived. So we got to see South Africa that very few whites actually got to experience. And it was a revelation. And once we got there, that is definitely the best thing we could have done. So in hindsight, it was the most important first step. But it was difficult. Thank you.
How you doing?
Good.
I have a question about Scott. Isn't that the boyfriend of Amy?
Yeah?
Do you still stay in contact with him, or?
Yeah. Scott was a basketball player at Stanford, and Amy was the diver, and they had gone their separate ways and kind of got back together again. And we spent a lot of time with Scott the first few years. He went on the family trip with us. He had been there a month, Christmas time for that year with Amy, and it was almost more difficult for him. And then one day he came. He called us, and he said, Linda and Peter, I'm going to bring you my things that I have of Amy. I'm going to bring them to you for the archives, for you to have. And that, that was great because it allowed, I think it was about 2 years after death, he was able to say, I can go on. And he has gone on. He's a lawyer. A few years ago, he got married. And fortunately, he married someone that said, Amy prepared Scott to be the person that I married. Because he was kind of an arrogant sports guy for a long time. But, he's doing well. He is doing well. But thank you for asking.
I wanted to ask, what was your first reaction when you found out that your daughter had died?
the first reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know, this is going to be sound a little bit strange, but Amy was sort of goal-oriented and an achiever. But every time she had a success, she always had a little something that went wrong. I'll give you an example. She worked very hard her senior year at Stanford on an honors thesis about Africa and whatnot. And she was just about ready. She had just gotten a grant in 1989 as she was graduating to go study and be in Africa, both South Africa and Namibia, where she was working. And everything was coming together, except she was using a friend's computer, and you know, not everyone had laptops and computers in those days, was finishing up her paper, plugged it in the wall, sparks came out. She lost everything in a fire. There were a few other examples I could go back to, but in a way, Amy had such an amazing experience. She was so excited about the work she had done, about just getting a fellowship to get a PhD when she got home, that it was almost like, oh my gosh, that's Amy. It was like, I guess you didn't want it to happen, but in some small part of me, I realized that almost was, I don't know, I don't want to say fate, but she worked so hard that it almost was a sense of almost non-surprisal. I can tell you it's a hard thing to explain, but I'm trying to be honest with you. Yeah.
Kind of short. Hi. What did you think about Amy going over to South Africa in such a dangerous time? Did you approve of her decision to go?
You know, when a young woman is committed and interested and impassioned and has the education, and you as a parent are wanting to raise productive people that will be good citizens of their world, it's not that you don't worry about them, but aren't most of our, you know, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but many of you have parents who are behind you and supporting your future and what you're interested in. Hopefully they are. So we were proud of Amy and that she made these decisions. And yes, it was scary, but she also lived in Washington, D.C. for a while. And that's a very scary community, you know? So in a way, it was like, this is her life, it's her freedom, and she was prepared. She was a student, an academic. She knew the situation. Yes, she did take a few risks. She did cross the line because she was willing to go into communities that others wouldn't go into. But you know, those are the communities that are the heart of me now. I wouldn't go to South Africa if I didn't go into those communities and if I didn't have a chance to work with tobacco and others. So we honor and respect Amy for her decision.
So, how does it feel to talk about all this now when you're standing up here?
How does it feel?
Yeah, or for him.
Let's have.
Yeah, I know wherever I am, people always wonder, as I sit here, is he okay? No, I'm fine. I'm okay. It was not an easy thing for me to do so. Even during the process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it's a pity I couldn't have a bigger influence in terms of saying I'm not going through the process. Because I very much believed the leadership of the movement that I belonged to was supposed to go and appear themselves in front of that commission, because they were the best people to be able to justify our actions. But nevertheless, the rules were saying the perpetrators have to appear in person. So having met the Biehl family, having gone through the process of asking for forgiveness, it's more than saying I'm sorry. Many people are also thought it's the same. But during the process, I felt losing so much, giving up so much, but after that I felt free. So when I was released a year later, it was very difficult for me to lead a normal life. Here I am, back at home. For the past 12, 13 years, never had a normal life. I've always been on the go. Even my own family, there's so much that they don't know about me. I don't even if I could ask them what's my date of birth, some will have to scrape their head to think. That's how far I was from home. So having gone through the process and work for the Amy Biehl Foundation Trust and work very close with the late Peter Biehl and Linda, I felt it became difficult for me to be myself. Besides talking about what I'm talking about and be here, just to exist, was I had to live with the fact that I was involved in a number of incidents and some which involved the death of Amy Biehl. So it became very difficult for me to lead a normal life. For me to be able to be okay with what I've done, I had to jump back into the shoes and think like a militant. And I had all the justification, and whatever I did was right, and there was nothing wrong. There was not an inch thing wrong with what I've done. But I was so desperate to be on the other shoes and not to be a militant. But through this relationship, I was able to learn the fact that to be forgiven, it's one story. But to find ways and means to forgive yourself as well, it's another battle. It's what I think people out there in our communities do not realize. When someone has done something and got out of prison and then goes back to prison, we think, oh my God, why did they even bother to give him parole? But we have no clue what goes through that individual. I know that firsthand because when I was released out of prison, I just couldn't be myself. And I was so desperate to be myself. But through the relationship, as years went on working together, understanding more of each other, and the trust relationship building up as well, I found myself being able to be myself and not to think as a militant, to be able to go and sleep. So today as I speak, as heavy as the load of what I was involved in looks like, but to me it is a lightweight. It's not heavy in shoulders, it's heavy mentally. Was I had to live with it, I had to accept that's part of my history. It's not going to go away. As much as we always, all of us want to carry a rosy picture of ourselves into the future, our past will always be there in that future. So I've learned to accept and shoulder it and go forward with it. So it's quite easy for me with the hope that people will learn from the living example. But sometimes people talk about us on our obituaries. But when we're still alive, we don't share our stories so that people could learn from it. I've learned and I've always shared with people whenever there's a dark cloud. If it's in the evening, definitely there is always a light after the tunnel. So when your life is clouded with dark clouds, there's one golden rule that I always want people to know. You must look around. There is a silver lightning. Don't rush into making your decisions. Because as much as when Amy died, I felt happy on that particular day because we were furthering the objectives of the movement and we were getting close to our freedom because we're sick and tired of dying for our freedom. To an extent, we became prepared to kill for it. It was not just a question of going out and kill. Eventually, the process itself got you prepared to kill for the freedom. So, but after I was released out of prison, I had realized that as much as I'm proud of my contribution to the freedom of South Africa, as much as I'm still even today actively involved in the reconstruction of South Africa, buildings that were bombed were reconstructed, roads that were damaged were reconstructed, vehicles that belonged to the state which were burned down, insurance paid off. But there's something that one cannot give back. It's a loss of life. And it's something that one had to accept and live with.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Linda. Tabeki, thank you.